What's going on, everyone? Welcome to a Friday edition of Back Your Play with Q. As always, I'm your host, Rich Quinones, hashtag BYP, from our good friends over at Scoots Liquors and Played Again Sports as well. Labor Day is right around the corner. They are pushing their golf clubs, their golf balls, their golf bags, the golf equipment, the spikes, everything for you guys out there. Get out there, used and new sports equipment, 1450 Clemensbridge Road in Deptford, New Jersey. Golf weather is all well and good, but hey, man, it's college football time as we welcome in our guy, our insider from On3 Sports, of course, Nick Kosko at Nick Kosko 59. And so we got it started, light action last night, but we've got a roundabout nice little slate of top 25. I guess I ask you this. I mean, last night, Utah, number 14, 24-11 against Florida. They look like the sleepwalking. How long or bad of a season does it look right now if you're a Gators fan?
Well, it stinks, Rich, because I actually grew up a Gators fan, the heyday of the Tim Tebow era. That's when I first kind of got into college football. In addition to my alma mater at Rutgers, I always had a soft spot for the Florida Gators. And just from a neutral perspective, it's like I didn't expect them to win last night, but I thought it would be, I don't know, maybe a little bit more competitive, but I was one of these guys that just never really bought into Graham Mertz. Now, all the respect to him, he's a college athlete. Again, these are still kids. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Essentially, these are not professional athletes. But Graham Mertz is what he is. He was like this at Wisconsin. He came out in 2020, his first year with starting action at Wisconsin. That first game against Illinois during the COVID season, the guy throws one incompletion, perfect passer. I think he threw like 4 or 5 touchdowns. You're like, oh my God, Wisconsin has a guy who's going to air it out every single week. And then he got COVID. He was out for, I think, 2 or 3 games. He also a couple with an injury. And then it was just a mess of the season the rest of the way. And then over in 21 and 22, he just wasn't the same. He started elevating a little bit in 22, but he was always just way too inconsistent, little turnover prone as well. So he answers the portal. It's like, okay, well, now you're in a competition with Jack Miller, former Ohio State quarterback, did not break the starting lineup over with the Buckeyes. So he's been in the Florida system for a couple of years. Maybe he has the edge, but no, Mertz got the start. And, without a true answer at quarterback, Florida is in this, well, what do we have here? Now, that's not to say that they can't turn around this year. And,
Sure.
Again, college football, we're always overreacting week to week in college football, especially because there's a top 25 ranking. You know what I mean? But it was going to be so hard to go into Utah and Salt Lake City and actually beat the Utes, 2-time defending Pac-12 champs, even without Cam Rising at quarterback. They just played phenomenal for what they had last night and took care of business. And, Utah's often running Florida's up. And, we have a couple questions, but I don't know. I would say Florida, you're probably hoping they can at least get to the postseason again this year, and you want to see improvement under Billy Napier in year 2. But right now, it's looking like, based on last night, you're probably going to see this is more of a long haul rebuild process from Napier to get the Florida Gators back to the peak of the SEC in college football.
Yeah, and that's a great segue, by the way, into when we talk about the long plan and week to week proposition, just like the NFL, college football as well. Prisoners of the moment. So now, boom, Dion, here we go. Let's get it going. Colorado, TCU. TCU is ranked number 17th. Of course, the team that played in a national title game. They're laying 20.5. I went back and I looked at just, the turnover, if you will. And I did a double take. You got 70 new names, 51 transfers, 71 from power conferences, 10 from Jackson State. So this is probably, you can make the case really with how the transfer portal has came to be over the last several years. The biggest, I guess you can say, turnaround when it comes to bodies in college football history. This is still a team that was 1-11 last year in Colorado. Look, man, TCU, obviously, different quarterback. We know that. They're laying the 20. It's Dion. We talked a little bit about it last week, the Dion effect. I just think it's tough for them to open up the season with so many fresh new faces on the road against TCU. And if this is a 38-13 type of game, I mean, what do we take away from it?
You really can't take too much away from it. And you made a good point. The fact that this team was 1-11 last year. Let's not forget that what Dion inherited. Now, again, you talk about the biggest transformation in college football history, at least in the modern era, with the way he turned over this entire roster. And I think there's maybe between 10 and 15 players maximum left over from last year's squad. So
Yep.
they know what was last year. And I'm sure they could tell what's entirely different. Now, there's chatter about how this team may be undersized as well in the offensive and defensive line departments, but you never know the quality of a team like this until you see them on the field for, you have to see it for more than one game. And I mentioned to you last week, and I forget exactly what I predicted for their record, but the best case scenario, you see what this team is probably after 4 weeks or after 4 games, a third of the way of the season. You're like, okay, whether they're 1-3, 3-1, 2-2, 0-4, they're not going to be 4-0. I can't see them going 4-0. I can't see them winning this game. Actually, I think they can make it interesting, and that would be typical Dion team. Make this game very interesting and be the talk of the town. But I think after a third of the season, cover, I could see them covering.
That's interesting. In the betting landscape, interesting is 30-21. 30,
right. I
23.
And the line's what, 21 and a half, right? 20 and a half right now. I could see your scenario where it's 38-13 and maybe TCU gets like a late cheap touchdown or something like that to, cover for, so the Horned Frogs cover. But, I could see this game being like a 31-14 game in favor of TCU. Dion and the Colorado Buffaloes cover there. But, it's going to be hard to evaluate this football team until you see them in 3 or 4 games. And then you could say, all right, well, how are they going to do with the gauntlet of their Pac-12 schedule? How are they going to do against, the lower rung teams of the Pac-12 this year? Can they win more than 1, maybe 2 conference games this year? So I wouldn't put too much stock into this game on Saturday, but I will say you can't, if you're Dion in Colorado, you can't go out there and lose 45-3. You can't go out there and get your doors blown off. That I will say, you need to show some kind of competitive fire because of all the talk, all the transformation.
Sure.
You definitely have a higher quality roster this year if you're Colorado. Can these pieces mesh? And I know there's already been, that we wrote it to it on 3. That quote from Dion earlier this week. He doesn't care about culture. He just cares about wins. And he said, the best teams I've ever been on, sometimes the quarterback and wide receiver didn't like each other.
Sure.
But we won games anyway. Sure. So what does that actually mean in the grand scheme of things? I guess it depends upon your definition of culture, I would say. But it's a grand experiment. We've been talking about it since the winter. It's a grand experiment, and I can't wait to see it unfold.
Flip side of that coin, though, if you're TCU, you can't win this game 24-17 first and foremost, right?
I would also agree with that. Yeah, because if you're TCU, you're a top 20 team already. You're getting respect in 2023 after a lot of your roster is now different from last year's national championship or national finals team. Again, wrong term, runner-ups. You're the number 2 team in the country last year when it was all said and done. So you don't have that same exact squad back. So is Sonny Dykes going to be able to push all the right buttons again? Probably. He's a good coach. This is a good program. Can they maintain their top 20 stats? Maybe sneak into that top 15, top 10 range later in the year? Maybe. But like you said, I don't think if you're TCU at home, and I know all the Dion hype train's coming in, Coach Prime's coming in, but if you're TCU, you're right. I don't think you can win this game by a touchdown. You need to beat him by at least 2 scores.
Yeah, I think, listen, the player on their spotlight is going to be Chandler Morris, right? Because this year, the expectation is more mature. You're not looking over your shoulder, right? Because the starter is no longer there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think they go out and make a statement, to be honest with you. I think for all the fluff and bravado, we'll spin it where, well, Colorado played hard, but they lost 35-13, and they're building something. That's what we're going to hear. They're building something.
Yeah, I could easily see that storyline unfold. Now, I will say, and again, I'm not picking this. I do think they can cover, and I would probably throw money on that they would cover that 20.5, and lose a 34-17 or a 38 to 20, I guess, something like that. But if they pull this upset, Rich. No, the entire college football media landscape is not going to care about LSU. They will. LSU, Florida State. They'll care about that on Sunday, which I'm sure we'll get into in a second. Right. All the talk is going to be about Deion Sanders. 1 win. It's going to change the entire trajectory and narrative of what he's done if they pull off this upset on the road. All the talk. It's
Deion Sanders. If it's Joe Schmo with a 1-11 Buffalo team, no one gives a shit.
No,
sorry.
Big upset, but no, it's going to be. It'll be the talk about Deion, and then there's going to be more. Legacy questions, something we can't predict for another 20 years, you know what I mean? Or talk about for another 20 years.
Right. No doubt. Speaking of what would be monumental upsets, let me ask you, do you know the last time Indiana beat Ohio State?
Oof. Well, they were close. I know they were close in 2020, but almost only counts in horseshoes, obviously. Uh, Actually, I don't know if they played in 2020. I'm gonna say it's probably been at least 30 years.
1988.
1988. All right, so I was close. 35 years. There you go. Was that was that game in Bloomington or was it in the horseshoe?
I believe it was in Indiana. I'd have to double check. It was 41-7, 27 straight losses. As you say, oof, like
Yeah,
this is a this
it's
is a
not good. No.
no. And you know what? For all the talk about the offense of Ohio State and Marvin Harrison Jr., well, go look at his counterpart, the other wide receiver. They have comparable numbers.
Yeah, Emeka
Emeka,
Egbuka is
yeah,
one that's he's one that's I don't think is talked about enough. Now when you talk about wide receiver duos in college football, you say, well, it's probably Ohio State. It's Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka, and then you have the rest of their depth. And don't quote me on this, but from what we're gathering, from what we've wrote, from what our folks over at Letterman Row have wrote about on our On3 site, Carnell Tate, true freshman wide receiver. He might get some significant playing time early on in this season. I'm talking about he's probably in the top 4 of the depth chart. He's probably I believe he's on the 2 deep. He's going to get a lot of blow this weekend. Again, I think Ohio State's going to blow out Indiana. Indiana's, I know they're not a marquee football program, but Tom Allen, I respect him as a head coach. But since 2020, this team has been on a downward trajectory, and I hate to use that common phrase, but Indiana, I don't think he's going to walk out of there with anything really to smile about after against Ohio State. Because again, they're going to, Kyle McCord's the starting quarterback for Ohio State. He was named that earlier this week. Devin Brown's going to back him up. I'm sure we're going to see both of them this weekend because I can bet you by halftime, Ohio State's going to be up, 28, 31-0, 31-3. They're going to have about a 4-score lead going into the halftime break, barring something unforeseen. You're going to see a lot of these young bucks from Ohio State, and especially ones that could contribute down the line. But I mean, it is amazing how this Big Ten matchup has been so one-sided.
Yeah, and so Indiana's 2-16 in Big Ten play since 2021. They've been outscored in those losses 259 and 125. I'm curious to get your take on, there's no Stroud. Brian Hartline has done a magnificent job with these wide receivers. He turns around. He's the new offensive coordinator. Is Daly going to flip-flop these quarterbacks? Are we going to see series between series, McCord and the kid Brown? Like, this is a 25-3 game. How do you think it plays out? I mean, McCord's the starter.
Right. Well, like I just alluded to, I think Devin Brown is going to play in this game. I know it's a conference game, but it's still a season opener. It's a game. Yeah, it's a game they're probably expected to blow out the Hoosiers. So you're going to see McCord. And people forget about this about Kyle McCord. I get you had the God rest his soul. You had the Dwayne Haskins at Ohio State. Threw 50 touchdowns his starting the year he started Ohio State. You had Justin Fields, the C.J. Strouds, all those guys. They've had a history of good to great college quarterbacks as of late, especially dating back to Urban Meyer's days when he led this team to a national championship back in 2014. So we're talking about a span of a decade now. You had Braxton Miller, the JT Barretts, and Cardell Jones for a short stretch there. But people forget Kyle McCord was a 5-star recruit. He's just been biding his time sitting behind guys like Stroud, and now he gets his opportunity. It was a razor thin quarterback battle from what we were gathering over at On3 and based on all the reporting that our Letterman Rose site did. Devin Brown, 4-star recruit himself, really good quarterback recruit, but McCord edged him out, and Ryan Day's a quarterback whisperer. We've seen that. I mean, this guy was in the NFL coaching quarterbacks as well. Then when he came to Ohio State, that was his specialty, the offense and running the quarterback. So now, is McCord as polished as a guy like Justin Fields or a CJ Stroud? I don't know yet, but I do know that he came in with credentials based on how he was recruited and scouted in high school, leading into himself as a college prospect. So I expect him to be really good this year. And if you're in a Ryan Day offense, especially with those weapons, I mean, we talk about the receivers. Don't forget the running backs behind them too. There, Rich. You have Trevion Henderson and Mayan Williams right behind them, and you have the big uglies up front and that stout offensive line as well. So I would expect McCord to maybe dice up the Indiana defense a little bit, and he'll get a rest. You'll see some Devin Brown, make sure that he's good to go in case he has to come in, barring an injury or McCord starts struggling later this year. So I think you will see both quarterbacks against Indiana, but I think this will be the Kyle McCord show, and I think he's gonna be very solid here in 2023.
Yeah, this has the makings of a 42-10 type of game. Ohio
State. Easily. I can't see it being any closer than that with the way Indiana is built right now.
Yeah, it'll close probably about 30 and a half. Listen, we go through this every weekend pretty much every season. Early on, you're going to get some of these ridiculously high lines. I mean, USC is favored by 38 against Nevada. Actually, Boise State and Washington is interesting because you got a top 10 team in Washington, and they're only laying 10 against Boise State. And I actually and I'd have to see if it moved at all. But I am curious to get your thoughts on that one. I wanted to pull up real quick. I'm looking at, hasn't moved as much. Oh, pardon me. No, it did. Look at that. Wow. So it jumped. Actually, it was right around 11.5. Now it's jumped all the way to 14. Something might be a little off right there. I have to see where I have to time it out to where I caught those odds at 10, but now it's sitting at 14 and a half.
But even if it's not that big of a jump, you could tell all the money is going towards Washington, obviously, because they said 10 points. That's it for a top 10 team.
Line.
Now Boise State, with that initial line, of course, of a line of 10, they are a respected Mountain West program, and this is a team that is going to be competitive pretty much a year in and year out. So now, do I see Washington still covering that number and even moves to 14? I would probably lean that way as well because I love their offense. Romo, I always forget how to say his name. Romo, I'm going to call him right now because now the pronunciation has slipped my mind, but he's a top tier receiver for them. Obviously, Michael Penix Jr., he had his college revival. I think we mentioned this last week as well. He is a fantastic quarterback in a big quarterback heavy conference in the Pac-12. The rest in peace to the Pac-12 at this point. But I would say Washington's going to show up this weekend and say, don't forget about us. We're a playoff dark horse for a reason. We're here to win the Pac-12 this year, and we're going to show it by score. They'll put up 45, 50 points. I can easily see that.
Roma Dunzi.
That's it. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Forgot the pronunciation right there.
Ridiculous last year. Almost 1,200 yards, average 16, 75 receptions, 7 touchdowns. A couple more, and again, nothing like, Michigan's laying 36 against ECU. We'll see you next week on that one.
The only storyline there, Rich, is it's game one without Jim Harbaugh. We talked about this before. That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
If that game ends up being too close for comfort, that's not a Harbaugh issue to me. That's a Michigan problem. It's like, all right, what is going? Yeah, it's either what's going on with the defense or why is the offense not clicking. It's gonna be one of those questions if it's close, but I don't expect it to be close at all.
No. Listen, the marquee game, and I'm happy it's on a Sunday, is LSU and Florida State.
You get that isolated, and it's similar to last year. They open up at a neutral site. Love that one, top 10 matchup. And I said this a couple of years ago. This was the 2021 season. Georgia, if you remember, Georgia and Clemson opened up the season. And that was I believe it was a 10-3 ball game.
Yep.
Georgia won. I said then the winner of that game will have the inside track to the playoff. The loser of that game, first game of the year, I said loser will not make the college football playoff. Now, there were other extenuating circumstances as to why Clemson did not make the playoff that year, but it turns out I was right about that. I think this game is very, very similar. I know it's a non-conference game, but right. I think if LSU is going to make the college football playoff this year, again, they have to run through the gambit that is the SEC West. They have to beat Alabama again. They're going to have to beat an Ole Miss team that has a solid offense. Obviously, Arkansas is no pushover. Their entire division obviously is no pushover. There's not a single pushover in the SEC for the most part. So if LSU is going to make the playoff, they have to win this football game. I think Florida State is the team that can get away with a loss here. Because Florida State, I think, has you hate to call it easy because the ACC is also another conference where you saw the middle tier teams kind of rise closer to the top. The North Carolinas of the world. I think they're very good. But Clemson's obviously still great. But I think Florida State has a better opportunity to get to the ACC title game with a loss via LSU. So at that point, you probably have to win. You basically have to win out because no two-loss teams ever made the playoffs. So either way, the loser of this game is going to have a tough time anyway. But I think LSU has more to lose here if they drop this football game because, again, you have the Alabamas, Ole Miss, you have Mississippi State, you have a tough Arkansas team, Texas A&M, Auburn. This is brutal. It's a brutal schedule by comparison to Florida State. So I would say LSU has more to lose in this game. And it's very tough. I do think LSU is going to win, but this to me, Q, is a very, very big toss-up game. But LSU definitely has more to lose here.
First top 10 matchup in series history. I look at, in the trenches, right? Your LSU offensive line against your Florida State the defensive front. How disruptive can they be? But I also like Florida's secondary. I think LSU might have a hard time picking these guys off a little bit. So I think you might see a play in the secondary maybe late to preserve the win. I'm actually,
yeah,
I'm leaning towards Florida State in this one, but I can appreciate your point. I think though, no matter what, this is kind of a litmus test to see if this is a 31-30, 31-28, Florida State fans don't want to hear this field goal attempt late, right?
yeah.
It's a litmus test to where both these teams, we project them going forward, if that makes sense. Like, that's why I love this early season test. But I also, to your point, which is, it's a good one, you hate getting that early loss like that, because then you're like, oh, frig. Now I got to run the table. All the pressure's on.
Yeah. Essentially, if you're losing this first game, you got to win 11 games in a row, pal. That's how you make your conference championship. Now, again, this is not a conference loss, so you can get away with it. But if you have playoff aspirations like both these teams do,
yes,
maybe you drop a conference game and this game. That's 2 losses. You're not getting the playoff, barring a bunch of other teams dropping along the way, which we thought we might see a scenario like that last year at one point. But no, you have to win this. Either one. You have to win this football game. If you want to make the Final Four at the end of the year, you have to win this football game. I am going with LSU a little bit, but also on the flip side of things, I am a little bit worried because they don't have Mason Smith. And if you recall, Mason Smith, their one defensive lineman, he was the one suspended for 1 game because he was signing autographs, quote unquote, illegally right before NIL went into effect. And I think I mentioned this last week on your program right here, that LSU was doing everything in their power to try to schedule a week 0 game before Florida State to make sure he got suspended for that game so he could play against Florida State. So there's no Mason Smith. Harold Perkins is going to have to shoulder more of the load on defense for LSU, the all-star linebacker. But on the flip side of things, you're talking about defense. You mentioned how LSU's passing offense could have a little trouble against Florida State. Watch out for Jared Verse, man. He's going to be after Jaden Daniels from that defensive line. You have to watch out. If LSU has no answer for him up front, he can make the day really, or the night really, really long for Jaden Daniels. But I mean, I am going to lean towards LSU right now. I do think they're going to come away with the win here.
Which then ultimately, think about it, if they can't really throw and be pass happy, they're going to have to run the football. LSU's has won 12 straight games when they've rushed for over 200 or more yards. They're averaging about 4.8 a clip.
Right.
Entering this season, if you look back to last year. So they've got capable backs. Yeah, I just have a sneaky suspicion it's going to be a turnover late, maybe driving for a winning field goal, but it's a good, it's a nice marquee matchup early on in the season, kind of all the points that you illustrated. Friday edition of Back Your Play with Q. Rich Quinones here. Our guy Nick Kosko, kind enough to join us. All right, so you got the ACC expansion. What is that in your estimation? The add-on Stanford, Cal, SMU. What does that mean for the college football landscape now going forward?
Well, essentially, you have a Power 4 going into next year, because until the Pac-12 decides what it's going to do for their immediate future, they have 2 teams left. They have Oregon State and Washington State in 2024. That is it. You have a 2-team conference, so that's not a conference. You really can't have that. So I know there was a lot of discussion about them merging with the Mountain West, or they were trying to poach Mountain West teams, or I think logistically speaking at this point, because you have 2 teams left, you just merge with the Mountain West and then see, all right, do you keep the Pac-12 branding, Pac whatever branding, or do you make it like the Pac West? I don't know what you would call this conference anymore. So the Pac-12 to me is basically dead, as it has been once Oregon and Washington left, you're like, all right, this conference is dead. But then
right.
At the same time, Utah, Arizona State said, well, we're talking with the Big 12. All right, now we're going to go to the Big 12. So they lost, and then that was on the heels, of course, Colorado saying we're going to the Big 12. So you lost 6 teams in one fell swoop over the course of this summer as well, after you already lost USC and UCLA last year. So 2024 looking vastly different. You have Power 4 now. Is this a good move for the ACC? I guess, because they needed to get in on the realignment game. Otherwise, the Big 10 and the SEC are going to leave everybody else for dead. The Big 12, obviously, to their credit, has been able to add teams, basically 4 Pac-12 teams, to beef up their conference after losing Texas and Oklahoma to realignment over to the SEC. So ACC is doing it for money. Are they the right ads? I mean, I guess you could say that just because they're 2 big West Coast brands, but isn't it kind of weird? I mean, geography has already been eliminated as far as conference realignment is concerned when it comes to, especially the Big 10, adding 4 West Coast schools when it was primarily a Midwestern conference, and they added the East Coast with Maryland and Rutgers. Now they're out on the West Coast with the 4 teams out there. So the ACC up and down the East Coast on the, literally the East Coast.
Yep.
That's pretty much it. Now you're going to add 2 California teams. That's fine. Maybe, and then get your footprint in Texas. I mean, I would say good for SMU. They said we don't want to be attached to a group of 5. Let's get it on the Power 5, Power 4. Let's be in a bigger, better branded conference that's going to help us in the long term if we have a great football program, which SMU, they still have never really fully recovered, I'd say, from the death penalty way back when. But now they're in a power conference, which is good for them. Stanford and Cal, they had to do something. Otherwise, they would have been left for dead. So I can't really fault them. But the Big Ten wasn't going to take them at this point. And then, I think the Big 12 said, we don't want you either. So, and obviously Stanford and Cal are not going to the SEC. So you might as well have to go somewhere. It's the ACC.
Yeah, you kind of nailed it, right? What's everything driven by?
Oh, it's money. It's TV money.
TV money, the money, and the security. Because you think about it, right? You've got Stanford, Cal, SMU. They basically have all agreed to forego pretty sizable portion of TV revenue the ACC generates by adding teams. So, I mean, again, you're talking,
and that's the same with Oregon and Washington doing
with
the Big Ten initially.
Oh yeah, so you're talking, it would create a pool of between 50 to 60 million annually to divide among ACC schools. So, I mean, that's, hey, by the way, let me ask you this before I let you get out of here. I do have an upset. I'm already putting a team on upset alert. I have South Carolina beating North Carolina outright.
Oh, that's interesting. Now it's not a crazy pick by any means. If you buy into the Shane Beamer hype, which I'm not buying into it, and I'm not selling it either. So I'm very indifferent about Shane Beamer and the South Carolina Gamecocks right now. Now I think what he's done in a couple of years has been very impressive, because you're talking about a program where, first of all, you're the son of a legendary coach anyway, so you're probably expected to live up to your father's name anyway. South Carolina has historically never been a great SEC football program. They've had their moments.
Yep.
They're obviously winning a lot of recruiting battles now. They're popular with the young crowd, I'd say. You know what I mean? Shane Beamer is that guy who can kind of appeal to the college student masses over in South Carolina. I'm not fully bought in yet. I'm still not fully bought into. I know it's his guy, Spencer Rattler, the quarterback, who feel like he's been in college forever. It seems like at this point. This is his 5th year. I mean, we go back to his Oklahoma days where he was a 5-star top quarterback in his class, and then just the hype. He did not match the hype. Now there was a certain point where he was really good. Don't forget that. I think his first full year as a starter, it was a rough start, but then he ended up with like 28 touchdowns and 7 picks and over 3,000 yards. So he had his moments, but then Lincoln Riley says, "Oh yeah, don't forget we have Caleb Williams on the bench right here, 5-star. You ever hear him, Rich? Caleb Williams."
Not a bad quarterback.
Not a bad quarterback at all. So he ends up replacing him. And then when Lincoln Riley leaves to go to USC, now it's like, all right, who's he taking? He's going to take Caleb Williams. Spencer Rattler's basically left for dead right there. And then Shane Beamer's already gone as well. So Shane Beamer was his guy and Rattler is Beamer's guy. So I understand the relationship there. But let's not forget, while Rattler had his moments last year in South Carolina, he wasn't great. He was good. He was good in spots. The team wasn't great. The team was good. So can I really buy into South Carolina yet? No, they're more of a prove-it team to me. If I'm going to go with a team in that game, it's North Carolina, because they have a more proven quarterback in my mind, Drake May. Drake May has been unbelievable since he stepped into the starting role, and there's a reason why he's the second best quarterback in college football, at least according to the NFL draft metrics going into 2024, behind only Caleb Williams. So I'll roll with the better quarterback, and again, it's new school with Shane Beamer against old school with Mac Brown. But if I'm going by that quarterback battle, Rich, I have to lean with North Carolina. I'm sticking with him and Drake May.
Cox go. They will be 2-0. They will be 2-0 when they meet Georgia, and they will get waxed by 40.
That was a terrible setup and a tease. I'm thinking you're about to say South Carolina's about to pull off the upset of the year.
Oh, come on, man! I gotta back my play with this. Is the name of the show. Absolutely no, but I'm backing it against North Carolina. Absolutely.
All right, interesting. I will say though, as a side note, Georgia will lose one game this year. They will lose a game before the title game, before the SEC.
It's not going to be against South Carolina.
No. I'm thinking Tennessee might pick them off this year. The way I have it, Rich, with my CFP picks, I have Michigan number 1. Yep. I have Georgia number 2, USC 3, and then Ohio State getting in number 4.
So you have them losing. You've got them losing to Tennessee. Tennessee's the second to last game of the season because they closed with Georgia Tech.
Yes. I would say if I'm going to pick a loss, I'll pick Tennessee because I do believe Alabama is going to lose a game as well this year. And I think when they both go into the SEC title games, it'll be Bama, Georgia in my mind for the SEC championship. They'll both have a loss. The winner gets to the playoff and the number 2 seed because it's the SEC. I do think it's going to be Georgia again this year. I think Michigan's going undefeated. I mean, spoiler alert, Michigan's my national title pick. I think Michigan's going undefeated and winning the whole thing. Georgia, to me, is the second best team. They will win the SEC at third. They'll be 12-1. USC probably going 12-1. They'll drop a game somewhere. I can't see them go undefeated, but they will win the Pac-12 and they'll get the third playoff spot. And then because it'll come down to Alabama with 2 losses, one to Georgia in the title game and one other game somewhere, and I will go with Ohio State 11-1. They will only lose to Michigan again this year, and they will sneak in.
So
they'll have a better quality than, say, the ACC winner, which will be Clemson or Florida State in my mind. I do believe Clemson's going to shoot themselves in the foot as well as Florida State. One of those two will have to. One of them will win the conference, but they'll be a 2-loss team.
2-loss team, yeah, which makes sense.
A 2-loss team.
We'll revisit this. So Harbaugh gets a national title, gets a national championship, gets out of his contract with Michigan, and then when the Cowboys fire McCarthy, Harbaugh becomes Dallas Cowboys' new head coach.
I know we've talked about this. I can see that scenario. I know that there's been more. I believe Bruce Feldman had made this prediction that if he goes out with a national title,
really?
Harbaugh will go back to the NFL. I don't think. I want to say he did not back that with any type of reporting. That was just speculation on his part, but I could see it. Can you imagine Jim Harbaugh winning a national title at his alma mater, especially an undefeated season? And he's like, okay, see ya. NCAA, wipe my hands clean. Going back to the NFL, win a Super Bowl.
Stranger things have happened. He, of course, is a Nick Kosko, Nick Kosko 59 college sports for On3 Sports, voice of RU Wrestling, Cal Live Sports. So I know you've got the Boss later tonight, which is pretty awesome. That's pretty cool.
Oh, yes.
Concert. Anything cooking high school wise this weekend with Labor Day and everything, or
off tonight on Friday on this Friday night, but do check out Cape Atlantic Live for mainland Ocean City. Obviously we do broadcast Lower Cape May and Middle Township football as well. That's Brian Kniff special over there. So they've had a couple Thursday games. So they played last night Lower Cape May, but mainland Ocean City is the feature game tonight on Cape Atlantic Live, of course, presented by Homer's Appliance Service. And then next week I'll be back. Gotta give Matt a shout out. Gotta give Matt a shout out right there. But next week we'll be back in action. I'll be back on the mic for Mainland against Oakcrest. That'll be next Friday, it's September 8th. So that'll be a 6 p.m. Start time in Northfield. Or what's your school is?
What's your favorite Springsteen song?
Prove It All Night on Darkness on the Edge of Town.
Interesting.
That is my favorite one.
Are you more of the old school genre with the Boss?
As far as like his you're talking about his early stuff, the Born the Runs, Darkness, and River. I would say so, yeah. But I will say I've done this before. I've ranked all his albums, and in my top 5. Okay, so you have the Born the Run, Darkness, River. They're in the top 5. You have to do it. Then you can probably go with Born in the USA. There, the big smash hit. You can make an argument for a different album as well, but how about this one? You probably haven't heard this one before. Western Stars from 2019 is in my top 5 Springsteen albums. His solo Western country themed album.
So you can't appreciate Hungry Heart?
Oh, I love it. Who doesn't love Hungry Heart?
You go. I mean, it's just he's been ripping the tunes for 50 something odd years, man.
Oh, of course. I mean, that's on the River, and I gave the Rivers in my top 5 albums. He might play that. He might play it tonight. We'll see.
Yeah, that's.
You got you have the trio of albums right there, and then you can throw Born in the USA or Tunnel of Love in there. But then I got to throw out Western Stars is my top 5.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the most profitable selling albums of all time, obviously.
Well, of course. So you don't have to. I mean, the quality of it. The Glory Days, by the way, not a great big hit, not a great song. Big hit, not a great song. It's entertaining.
It's an entertaining bar song.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. There are far better songs on that album, but I'm sure he'll play it tonight because
maybe you'll get a little Born to Run.
Well, I'm sure we will. There's no way he doesn't play that. Gotta get a little Born to Run.
Yeah, you know,
I'm excited. I'm excited to hear the new stuff. You know, he had that album out of covers of those old Motown covers. He's been playing a handful of those on the tour.
it's crazy that he's just how old is Bruce now? How old is the
I
boss?
think 73 off the top of my head. Still
Uh,
playing 2.5 hour shows.
born 1949.
73, 74 then.
Pride of Long Branch, New Jersey.
Gotta love it. Resides over in Colts Neck now.
Right, that's right.
That's right. Big horse, big farm.
Yes,
That's
this
the
is true.
that's the goal in life, isn't it?
Yeah, for everyone, right? Everyone had that farm. All right, brother. Always appreciate a couple moments. Enjoy it, and enjoy the games this week and enjoy the concert tonight. We'll do it again next week, pal. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Appreciate you, Rich.